thank you for your
بطلكم في الحضور وأتمنى
this session will end in appropriate conditions. Mr. Clark, kindly introduce to us our agenda of the morning session.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
The items on the agenda are the information note on the report of the Committee of Discipline, which was presented on the 9th of October 2019.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Clerk.
I don't know.
Honorable Vice-President.
Vice President.
السيد الرئيس الأمين العام.
That is 9 October 2019. We received in this hall George Silva Ore, President of the African Court on Human and People's Rights and Chair of the Disciplinary Board set up to know the situation against Mr. Yusufa Jobe, the former Deputy Clerk, the former interim clerk, and Deputy Clerk in charge of Administrative Affairs and Human Resources of the Pan-African Parliament. Pursuant to the resolution of PAP/05/May 2019, on consideration of the final report, the permanent report of the Pan-African Parliament would recall that in his presentation made before this August Assembly, George Ore summarized the work which was done by the Disciplinary Board. In particular, the conclusions and recommendations. The judge stated that the disciplinary procedure was consistent with the provisions of the African Union rules. The member of staff was present, and pursuant to Article 59 of the African Union regulations and rules, which provides that the competent authority of any organ who, for the Pan-African Parliament, is a bureau, can make decisions after receiving recommendations of the Disciplinary Board. The object of this communication is to inform the plenary of the decision made by the Bureau pursuant to Article 12.6 of the PAP Protocol and Article 17.1 under the respect of the principles of pluralism of forms and competence. Before going into the details, it is important to recall that the matter brought before the Disciplinary Board against Mr. Yusufa Jobe comprised the 11 charges. The following are: 1. Negligence to carry out his duties leading to financial losses. 2. Fraud, dishonesty, false and embezzlement of funds. 3. False declarations or false certification within the framework of a declaration, of claims. 4. Abuse of power or abuse of authority. 5. Distribution and use of African Union property for personal use. 6. Illegal transport of funds of the African Union. 7. Disobedience to legitimate and reasonable orders. 8. Refusal to execute legal instructions. 9. Deliberate exposure or by negligence of some persons to psychological or physical danger or to harm and torture. 10. Negligence or omission to execute tasks which lead to a harm or affecting the reputation of the Union. 11. Negligence of obligations, thereby exposing the institution to legal risk. In his communication, Judge Ore indicated to us that considering the gravity of the accusations against Mr. Jobe, the Disciplinary Board tried to scrupulously consider the observations made by the respondent and the testimony presented by others. With evidence, the Disciplinary Board also heard witnesses and counter witnesses in respect of the adversarial principle and the rights of the respondent. It is this exercise that threw light to the disciplinary board, which concluded that there was sufficient evidence to prove 10 out of 11 charges against Mr. Jobe, and this led the board to declare Mr. Jobe guilty of the following: 1, negligence or omission to execute his duties leading to financial losses; 2, fraud, dishonesty, embezzlement of institutions' funds; 3, false declaration or false certification within the framework of a claim; 4, abuse of power; 5, distribution and use of the African Union property for personal purposes; 6, illicit transport of funds of the Union; 7, disobedience to legitimate and reasonable orders; 8, refusal to execute legal instructions; 9, negligence or omission to execute task leading to damage or harm to the reputation of the institution; 10, negligence of the obligation to expose the institution to thereby exposing the institution to legal risks. Honorable parliamentarians, dear colleagues, these are the conclusions which confirm serious acts, and without any doubt, led the disciplinary board to declare Mr. Jobe guilty and recommended unanimously as follows: that Mr. Jobe be dismissed of his duties as a staff of the African Union with all the consequences of the law; 2, that he should be held liable to reimburse to PAP all the losses incurred and the funds which he acquired illegally; that 3, that the finance division should calculate the quantum of the amounts which should be reimbursed to the institution; the rights of separation with the respondent should be considered. The finance division should do this with the contribution of the legal division, and he is owing $148,000, which he has caused as loss for the Pan-African Parliament as a result of his actions and omissions in the Pan-African Parliament. Of this amount, we have to add 51,000 and a fraction dollars, US dollars, which represents the amount which he acquired illicitly, and this should be recovered by the Pan-African Parliament, and this should be deduced from his privileges. This does not include the debts which the applicant took and which he should pay back. The institution should also implement a number of measures of control measures and reforms to ensure that this situation should not be replicated, this situation caused by Mr. Jobe, and there should be no ramifications of some of these abuses which Mr. Jobe has committed. He did so with connivance of some members of staff of the Pan-African Parliament. It is not redundant to recall that Judge Ore indicated before closing his statement that the disciplinary board considered all possible options. They tried to explore humanitarian conditions before recommending these sanctions, which for the board were just measures which had to be imposed because of the gravity and conduct of Mr. Yusufa Jobe, because he was guilty of all these acts. Honorable parliamentarians, dear colleagues, as I have indicated when I started my speech, Article 51(17) of the Staff Regulations and Rules of the African Union provide that the competent authority, which is the Bureau in our case, once it receives the recommendation, should make a decision. It is therefore my duty to inform you that the Bureau of the Pan-African Parliament met on the 15th of October 2019 and scrupulously considered the recommendations made by the disciplinary board and decided: 1, to take note of the recommendations of the disciplinary board presented to the Bureau and to this plenary by George Sylvain Ore, chair of the disciplinary board. 2, unanimously approve the conclusions of the disciplinary board and the sanctions recommended against Mr. Jobe Yusufa. 3, instruct the Secretariat to implement the decision of the Bureau with immediate effect. This informative report has been presented to you for you to be aware and for whatever purposes that it may be necessary. It is consistent with the protocol of PAP, and it respects the principle of parallelism of forms, and I would like to thank you all.
Yes.
Yes, Mr. President.
Yes?
Guidance, Mr. President.
Yes?
Thank you so much, Mr. President, honorable colleagues. I would like to be guided in regards to this particular issue that has been brought to our attention. And I know that the staff of any institution, they are also protected by certain regulations. And I know that the Pan-African Parliament is not any different. I would like to be guided whether the right to a fair hearing was instituted and before the dismissal of the member and the recommendations of the different committees, the Bureau and also the disciplinary committee. I don't know whether the right to a fair hearing as per the administrative measures was accorded to the member in place. And then 2, I would also like to note from the presentation that has been made by the President, he also mentioned of connivance of the Mr. Jobe with other staff. I would also like to know what measures the disciplinary committee and the Bureau has taken towards those staff, and could those staff also be brought to the attention of the members so that we know that the disciplinary action has been taken holistically. Over to you, Mr. President.
Merci.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to answer the first part, because that is whether the Bureau, because now it's about the Bureau, whether the Bureau followed the proper disciplinary procedures or whether the due process was complied with, and to extend whether principles of natural justice, of the right to be heard, the right to call witnesses, the right to full disclosure of all information, and also absence of bias, whether those were complied with. Let me explain as follows. There are rules and regulations of the AU which bounds all the organs of the AU on matters of staff. And I can tell you, within the Bureau we had heated debates in trying to ensure that we follow the proper procedures which ensure fairness. That, I can assure you, there was quite some hot debate. Until we are satisfied that we are doing the right thing. The rules of the AU state that when there is a disciplinary procedure to be instituted, the head of the organ first can suspend. So the power to suspend by the head of the organ are enshrined in the rules. So the suspension was proper. The second thing is that once you suspend, they prescribe some number of days that you then need to institute an investigation and come up with an investigation report first. And that report should then be presented to the suspended employee to respond before any disciplinary hearing. It's a unique procedure. In other organizations, you don't have that bond. I have to be very detailed. The intention or purpose of that stage is to say, in case his response is so satisfactory, you may not need to move to a disciplinary hearing. So when that document was presented to Mr. Jobe, he did not reply to the document. Instead, his lawyers, when they realized that now we are proceeding to a hearing, they wrote and said, no, we have to comply with South African laws. That's what they said. South African laws, and this is not proper, they were responded to that, look, this is an international organization and it has its own procedures. And we have a case law against Martha Luleka from Tanzania, a similar case about PAP. So the rules that apply are international and the proper protocols were quoted. So the lawyers then said, okay, now we are coming to the hearing. So then a hearing took place. But who was the composition of the hearing or the board? Again, the rules say the head of the organ will appoint the person to chair the board. I'm aware some may say, how could President Roger appoint? And I'm saying in the Bureau, these matters were really debated. And the rules are very clear. The person who chairs the board is the head of the organ, whether it's Pan-African Parliament, African Court, and any other organ. And then it says, in that committee, a member of the staff association, whether one or two, should be there. And then it prescribes the membership of who should be there. And I can assure you that was done. And someone from the AU had to be part of that hearing, and that was done. You are aware that the AU usually also wants to question how these things are being done, but they participated. So in terms of procedure and the composition is prescribed in the rules. I want to emphasize that point. If you ask why did this one participate, it is because the rules say some staff members have to be in that committee. We even debated whether that was proper. And I remember our own legal counsel said, if we don't involve staff, the whole procedure will again be ruled null and void. But so we had to comply with what the AU says. Some staff members, the association, and then the chairperson. In this case, it was seen proper that for people to see that it's fair, let's have somebody. Mr. President, there seems to be another meeting this day. Yeah, there seems to be some other meeting. Anyway, the Bureau in its wisdom said, in order to show impartiality, let's take the president of the African Court. These are very seasoned people who would have served in their own countries for years as judicial officers. By the time you join the African Court of Justice and become the president of it, surely if you don't have confidence in that type of profile of a presiding officer of a hearing, I don't know what other setup we would have confidence in. And that man cannot be brought in to play games. He is a very senior judicial person. And he came, presided over the proceedings, and again during the proceedings, fairness was followed because even Njobe was invited. He presented his case, he came with his own lawyer. Witnesses were allowed, which again, tenets of natural justice. He was allowed to bring in witnesses. I don't need to say what the witnesses say, but that is what happened up the end, and the recommendations were made and the conclusions. I'm just emphasizing that both in terms of procedure of the AU, both in terms of natural justice, I personally and everyone else is satisfied that I think that we tried our best. Thank you very much.
Cher colleague.
Dear colleagues, I would like to say that we're not really discussing the inquiry. The inquiry is not a matter of public discussion because the investigations were carried out. It is the procedure which my colleague has just said, which is of importance. The investigations were carried out before everyone. There was counsel for the respondent. There was Anglo-Saxon law, what we call cross-examination, and this is called the adversarial principle. I have been subject to this exercise too. So today, Judge Ore came here. He presented to us the findings. If there are some people who want to know more, it is a procedure which we are following. I know that you've been told that the matter may be brought to court. You may go to court and defend this, because I know we were not all here present during the investigations. Therefore, if we could just rely on the conclusions which have been presented to us, that would really be a matter of saving our time, and I would like to thank you.
Yes.
Mr. President, it is a fundamental principle of the criminal law that it is better for 10 or more people that are guilty to go to jail than for one innocent person to go to prison. It's so fundamental in the criminal law. That's all the more reason why, as far as I know, what has been done by the committee, if we liken that to the general construct of the criminal justice system, we would say that what has been done by the committee could be likened to mere police investigation. That's all the more reason why recommendations were made. They did not arrive at conclusions. They only made recommendations. And the mere fact that that document was read in the chambers of parliament would inform every member of parliament that we matter as members of parliament. We matter in the decision making relating to Mr. Jobe. As far as I know, we haven't got the full information regarding what was done. And indeed, the chairman of the committee said in this well of parliament that what he was presenting to us was the summary of the proceedings. I consider that to be unfortunate, because when it has to do with criminal charges, when it has to do with offenses levied against somebody, offenses that are criminal in nature, we don't talk about summary. I would have thought that we see the full text of the entire proceedings so that we address our minds to what went on in actual fact. In the circumstances, Mr. President, honorable members, I am urging this House to stay whatever decision that we want to take until probably the next session, when we will all properly debate the full text of the proceedings. I thank you very much.
Procedure, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President, for your communication and letting us, as the members of Parliament, representing our countries as far as this very, very vital, sensitive issue is concerned. Mr. President, I stand to be corrected. I remember in the past some reports from PAC which were brought on the floor of this August House, indicated that there were so many financial irregularities for some time. And at one time, I think one report was sent back so that it could be harmonized. In your communication, and as my other colleague has just said, all the offenses 11, in their nature, they are criminality. And you communicated that the actions that were done by the past Mr. Jobe was in connivance with other staffs. Now, the procedural matter I'm raising, Mr. President, sir, is concerning the issue of holding one individual responsible while the others who were also in connivance and played a part in the roles or in these other charges are not criminalized or have not yet been brought to book. Wouldn't it have been procedural right if a comprehensive investigation was carried out involving all these other accounting officers so that they are also held responsible? Number two, wouldn't it be procedural right that all the accounting officers in this institution go through a comprehensive investigation how they are managing the finances of this institution? I thank you.
Wait, you are going to give the last response.
I'm standing up because this is a bureau matter and I am a member of that bureau. The issue, I think, thank you for the questions. You're actually raising very fundamental questions. The issue of proceedings in a criminal, of a criminal nature, and you are alluding to criminal proceedings. Let me emphasize that this is not a criminal proceeding. I think that's very important again. That this is a civil proceeding. I don't know in French how you put it, but it's
criminal, sir.
Can I finish? Can I finish? These are not criminal proceedings. These are civil proceedings. I think that should be settled. Then the next thing is, if there is the criminal aspect of it, that is now the role of this plenary. That's the role of this plenary to say, because of fraud, because of this, we are further as a plenary. Here we are only saying the recommendation was for dismissal. If the plenary says, can we also proceed beyond dismissal to institute criminal proceedings, that's now the plenary. But the proceedings under this hearing were civil proceedings. They are civil, they are not criminal. Fine. Sorry. Let me maybe repeat. In a labor case sense, a labor proceeding is not a criminal proceeding. This is very important. A labor proceeding is not a criminal proceeding. But after finding a person guilty on a civil standard, because the standards, at least in English, the Roman Dutch law is different. Because in a civil proceeding, you prove on a balance of probabilities. In a criminal proceeding, you prove beyond any reasonable doubt. And that proceeding was not criminal proceeding. But as you proceed, there can be criminal issues emerging from a civil proceeding. Then you hand over that matter to a criminal, proper, competent criminal platform. Thank you.
Thank you.
شكرا سيد. لقد قلت هذا كثيرا وأكرر. هذه المؤسسة هي الأكثر أهمية في القارة. هذه المؤسسة يجب أن تكون نموذجا لكل أجهزة الاتحاد.
Institution. But what we are doing here is, for me, is undesirable and it is not inspiring at all. A judge came here. I didn't say anything. I should have even stopped him. This is a parliament. You can't just come to parliament with summaries of matters so important as this, and then you say, that is it. What do we have here on table, palpable, on which we can base ourselves and take any decision here? Nothing. The judge came, he jumped. There were many gaps. When he was reading, there were many gaps. He gave a summary to Parliament without any document. And then today you came here again without any document. Are you just informing us? Do we matter at all in this case? Is it you alone who should take a decision? If that is the case, why have you come to tell us? Why didn't you just decide to do what you have decided to do without coming here? Because you have given us nothing, absolutely nothing on which we can base ourselves and say, yes, this is this. Chief, I'm sorry to say, but your disciplinary committee acted as a court. They found Job guilty accordingly on 11 accounts. That is how a court operates. If it was just a committee of inquiry, the findings should be referred to a court. But you constituted a committee, a so-called disciplinary committee, and that disciplinary committee came to conclusions that a court would have come to. And you have given nothing to us. My question is, why have you come to tell us what you are telling us? Since you have said that it is up to you to decide, why did you come here to say what you are saying? This is an insult to this institution. This is an absolute insult to this institution. We don't deserve this. We deserve more than this. We are supposed to clear the way for justice in this continent. We don't have to shoot the path of justice in this continent. And this is precisely what you are doing. If your committee has come to conclusion that your job has done this, my question is, what are the answers of Job to this question? What has he responded? We have been hearing only one side of the story. I have not heard anything from Job. By the way, you are saying Jobe, it's not Jobe, it's Job. You don't pronounce the E. It's Job, not Jobe. There's nothing like that. Please, if you want to do justice to what has happened, your committee has drawn conclusions. These conclusions are supposedly criminal. They refer them to a court. He's my compatriot, but he has never told me anything. And you have told me nothing other than what you have written in Kappa report. That is insufficient. And that is why you constituted a committee. That committee's findings should be subjected to something else. Not just come here and say, we have dismissed him. Where have you ever seen such a thing?
Merci, cher collègue. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, dear colleague. Thank you very much.
Collègue, moi je crois que
Dear colleague, thank you. I think that we should leave aside issues that divide us. It is an administrative procedure. The sanctions proposed are administrative sanctions that can be brought to a court at any time. Every person being aware of the matter is recused from the beginning. Mr. Job came with a lawyer, and he recognized the competence of the disciplinary committee. We cannot say bad things about each other. We were not members of the disciplinary committee. We tried to follow the procedure based on the rules of staff of the African Union. So go and defend it when the matter goes to a court. The facts are there. When Kappa presented the report here, the whole plenary had applauded, and they said the Bureau doesn't do what it is supposed to do, the Bureau is incompetent. Today, the Bureau is ordering a disciplinary committee, and so there are contradictions. We have to be fair towards each other. The president was actually suffering from allegations. Mr. Job declared that he gave money to the president. So he said he took money to give the president. All our colleagues here can be in my place today. And he said the money that I took, it was to give to the president. So things are to be clarified. So this is going to go to court. I wish to end this debate on this subject, and I consider that the information has been received and the procedure will follow. Thank you.
yes.
Mr. President, sorry. I think the issue of taking the matter to court, I just want to advise that there are two separate processes. And let's not be unnecessarily emotional and even worsen the situation. That's my advice. It's my advice. If now you say no, let it go to court. Is it proper? Yes. But is that the decision of this plenary? Do we all desire that route for job? Is that our wish as a parliament, that we hand over the matter to the police? Which court means to the police?
Yes.
Is that a genuine desire of the plenary?
Yes, can I be heard?
But can you let us to talk?
Can I be heard?
If he's asking that question, we need to also say our opinion. But we've been raising our hands. We cannot close this and move on until you give us the opportunity to voice our concerns. Because the dignity of this parliament is all our responsibility. We cannot just allow things like this to tarnish the image of PAP. The Kappa report was very clear. 4 clerks in 4 years, and some issues are surrounding this, and you bring another one right now. You need to let everybody speak their mind. Because the dignity of this parliament is our responsibility. You cannot just come in the morning and lecture us on issues that we really need to discuss. If this is a criminal matter, so be it. But if you're going to bring it in plenary here to discuss it, we have the right to discuss it. You cannot just come, lecture, and then you move away like that. That's unparliamentary. That's very unparliamentary.
Mr. Vice, the only institution.
You need the floor. Mais on donne à tout le monde. Monsieur, vous avez déjà parlé.
You have already spoken, Honorable. Others also want to take the floor.
Président, laissez que les autres s'expriment.
Others also need to take the floor.
Président. Ouais.
Thank you, Mr. President. As a new member of this parliament, I am completely and fully disappointed and disgusted. An organization cannot function if a member of the organization does not adhere to the conditions of the official documents. The Bureau has the responsibility of administrative management of our institution. The Bureau takes its responsibilities and informs us. This morning we heard information. I do not understand that within a parliamentary chamber, well, we are parliamentarians and we develop laws and official documents, and it is our duty to adhere to them. How is it possible that a bureau gives information and a debate begins? The first contribution spoke about asking for details. Why do we need to go further into detail and further and further and further? We are representing the African people here. We are not representing our respective states. As a new member, I am really completely, totally disappointed. Thank you.
L'application des textes doit prévaloir.
The application of official documents shall prevail in the organization that we represent. Thank you. Thank you for the floor, Mr. President. I thank you for the information you gave us. I would like to give some advice. Would it not be prudent for the Pan-African Parliament and for the African Union to continue with the suspension and take the matter to court? Because if you make a decision that is based on criminal proceedings and that you are an administrative body, would it not be more prudent to send the matter to court? And then after that it will be clearer, and this will also protect public funds. Thank you. Chief.
You still come back to you. Don't worry. I think let's move and debate and discuss intellectually, fairly. We're not even accusing whoever. And I'm standing up a lot because this is also my professional area of practice. So I'm just encountering things that I'm also very familiar with. these are the labor, and there's a reference to it was a court. It is a quasi-judicial proceeding. It's not a proper court of law. It's a quasi-judicial proceeding. What that means is that it should follow principles of natural justice. That is right in law. So although it is not a court of law, but because it's quasi-judicial proceedings which determines rights of persons, it has to follow principles of natural justice. So the inquiry here should be, did we follow principles of natural justice? Then again, you can find a person guilty in a civil proceeding, but still found innocent in a criminal proceeding. That does not vitiate, and I'm using technical language, that does not vitiate the proceedings of a quasi-judicial proceeding. So, if Jobe or any other employee in any country goes to court today on a criminal matter and wins, it does not follow automatically that the civil procedure is nullified. Because the civil procedure uses a lesser standard of proof on a balance of probabilities. The criminal court uses another standard. So in a civil procedure, an employee can be fired, yet still found innocent in another court. Although personally, if you advise me, if I were to advise, I would say no, let's not jump to criminal for job. It may not be wise, because the consequences in that area are too grave. Yet in our case, if he's just dismissed, he can still look for another job, even within the AU, and continue with his life. So some of these recommendations we are making, I can advise that I'm totally against at this stage saying criminal, let's go to the police. Because I am very sure that we will probably be pursuing a more harmful and painful consequence to Job himself, whom we are trying to protect. Let's go to the next stage. We want the judgment, the whole judgment to be read. Probably it's 120 pages. Mr. President, if they are patient enough, it could be read, for example. But sorry, let me do this. Please, let's not do things here differently from what we do in our own countries. In any country, a court can issue a judgment on a particular matter and sentence, and still say the full judgment, because you take time to write, will come later. People don't say that's not a judgment because I haven't read a full 20-page document. You still move, and this is common in all of your countries. The actual detailed judgment can come 7 months later, even after 12 months. But as long as the judge makes a pronouncement, that judgment is binding, unless there's appeal. So what would then happen is, if we say he's guilty and dismissed today, Job will then say, would then say, right, what I want is the full judgment so that I can appeal. The full judgment usually is for appeal purposes, if you want to appeal. But Mr. President, I'm simply sharing with you. I'm not directing, I'm just sharing that whilst I listen to you, some of the issues you are raising at law are not quite competent. But at the same time, your feelings is why we are here. This is what happened. And if you believe that the whole judgment should come, until it's unprecedented. Judgments are never debated, even in your parliament, for example. But anyway, Mr. President, I'm just sharing my views.
Mr. President, I'm here.
Yes, you have to wait, please. Roku, Fantamadi, and you, the last.
Akru Fantamadi.
President.
No, tu as déjà parlé.
You have already spoken. Others also wish to take the floor. Thank you, Mr. President. In this parliament, like someone said before me, we tend to be emotional instead of adhering to the law. We have official documents we need. During these 3 or 4 days, I saw Mr. Job. Who had no objection to be part of the exercise. He was there from beginning to end, and the judge said here that at the end of at the beginning and at the end of the process, he asked the question, do we trust him? And I think that it was very clear that he was trusting his lawyer. So today we are given a conclusion. If Mr. Job is not satisfied with his suspension, compromise his career. And in his the removal of number plates of a vehicle that is not functioning anymore in order to take advantage of petrol for his own vehicle. That is sufficient to incriminate someone like him. He was Deputy Parliament has to have this kind of matter. We will not hesitate. The suspension of the acting clerk is at the discretion of the president of the institution. It's not here that we are going to question the rules. In all parliaments, it is the same thing. So we have to adhere to the principles that govern us and that will allow us to go forward. Because tomorrow, no clerk that is going to be nominated is going to do the same as Mr. Job. Thank you. Honorable Rocco, and you first, and then the last contribution. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. No sé si tiene ya traducciones. ¿Sí tienen?
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you. First of all, I should like to thank you for the information that you communicated to us this morning. In fact, it's very important because management of Parliament is very important indeed. We are members of Parliament. We are politicians at the same time. The clerk's office is something else. Those are people dealing with administration, and so that our work is improved. We have heard through the representative of the Pan-African Parliament, and that we all should adhere to that. And I think that the procedure concerning Mr. Job should be sent to lawyers and to a court, as long as there is no
purpose of giving that report to us if we have no role to play. Because if we had a role to play, or you are presenting it here for the purpose of familiarize ourselves with the facts, who constituted the committee, who were the witnesses, what type of evidence was led, was it sufficient, were the parties which were appearing before the panel given fair hearing. Now, if you don't want us to do anything, you must just say so, that we have no role to play. And therefore, it should never be argued anyway that this parliament has actually adopted a report which doesn't know how the process unfolded, because papers are not even given to us. But secondly, Mr. President, at some point you may want to take us into confidence as to why do we lose clerks under you. We lose a clerk after another, clerk after clerk, yet the president remains the same. What type of leadership do you provide if these clerks cannot be in this parliament until you finish your term of office? We are told that Job actually is found guilty of stealing the money. Is Job keeping the safe keys? Is Job the only signatory? We are told he connived with other workers of this parliament. Who are those workers? What is happening to those workers? It can't be that a person who's not the only signatory steals money, and we're only told it was he connived with others, and those others are not identifiable and were not being told what type of action is being taken. Why was that action not taken simultaneously with Job when he was going through the DC? So all of this is not properly explained, but if we have nothing and no role to play, you are just informing us, I'm happy to receive that information and not do anything with it. But I'm not going to endorse a report I'm not familiar with, where people are just mentioned in passing, he connived with others. He's not keeping the keys of the safe. He's not the signatory alone. The president is the last authority. Where was the president when these shenanigans were happening? Why did the president allow so much money to disappear under his own watch? Because you are the accounting officer. So we should at some point have an honest discussion about why are we not keeping our clerks in this parliament. Job is not the first one. There was a clerk before Job. We came here, we debated that clerk, nothing happened. And if this protection of the leadership of the bureau is going to continue, you are not going to have reliable clerks, and without reliable clerks, will not have stability in the management and the staff members of this parliament. And I even doubt if there will be anyone willing to be a clerk if clerks can be lost like this without serious consideration. Thank you very much.
Monsieur Malema, je vous...
Mr. Malema, I call upon your integrity. Please, would you switch off your microphone? Thank you. Your moral integrity, Mr. Malema, maybe it's something you don't know. The President of Parliament is not the accounting officer of the Pan-African Parliament. There is only one signatory, and that is the clerk. And he is assisted by his financial director. So I cannot even tell you how many bank accounts we have here. I don't know. Secondly, I do not sign. You are generalizing the matter. If you were a president, the rumor will be persistent, and everyone would know that everyone who is here works for Malema and takes money to give to Malema. So everyone is aware of that. Everyone was aware of that here. We looked for the truth. In 2018, what happened during the summit in Mauritania? The heads of state were approached by the East Africa region, saying that the president had stolen money. The heads of state had an independent audit. The results of the audit established very clearly that financial management functions are not the responsibility of the president. A job was nominated after a decision made by the Bureau, and he began to work. And everything that he did, he made as if the president was responsible. If there is any proof that the president took any money, then immediately you will call for my resignation. The recourse is here for this matter. A disciplinary committee was there. They produced 75 pages. The judge will know the substance of the matter. I thank you. I'm just telling you that the signatory is the clerk, and he is the one who compromised himself because he was acting clerk and he was in charge of finances. We tried to do everything to remove him out of there. I was the first person to tell him, listen, you are the acting clerk. Do not carry any cash money. Do not go on missions carrying cash money. Thank you very much for your contributions. I adhere to the decision made by the judge. Thank you. Mr. Clark, you have the floor. Thanks.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. A motion was submitted. Who is the author of the motion? I don't have the motion, says the President. Honorable Harsveira. No? Europe Simon Gilles. Simon Gilles, you have the floor to present your motion.
President, good morning, honorable members of Parliament. I stand here to present a motion in accordance with the rules and procedures of our Parliament, and I so read. The Pan-African Parliament, in accordance with Rule 60 of the Rules of Procedures of the PAP, considering Article 3 of the Protocol to the Treaty establishing the African Economic Community relating to the Pan-African Parliament, which provides, inter alia, that the Pan-African Parliament aims to facilitate the effective implementation of the African Union policies and objectives, to contribute to the more prosperous for the future of African people by promoting collective self-sufficiency and economic recovery, and to promote peace, security, and stability, recalling the historical contribution made by the Cuban Revolution towards the liberation struggle of many African countries, considering the present level of economic, socio-cultural, political, and diplomatic ties between Cuba and the African continent, considering the continuous contribution made by Cuba towards empowering African people by providing educational, scientific, and medical services, recognizing the continuous expression of support in the cause being pursued by African at levels of AU, and considering the need to establish constructive relationship between the Parliament of Cuba and the PAP, hereby submit a motion appealing to the plenary of the PAP to consider the merit of granting Cuba the status of observer at the Pan-African Parliament. Mr. President, I do submit. Thank you very much.
Who seconds the motion? Honorable Felisberto Vieira. The motion will be a part of the agenda of our next session. Thank you. In accordance with the provisions of Article 38H, I would like to invite Dr. Ahmed Aitingani Sid Ahmed, a consultant, to enter into the chamber. Mr. Clark, can you read to us the item that is part of our agenda? Thank you, Mr. President. Presentation and debate on the draft model law on food security and nutrition. Presentation and debate on the draft model law on food security and nutrition. I would like to invite Honorable Connie Donio, Chairperson of the Committee on Rural Economy, Agriculture, Environment and Natural Resources and Environment, to make his presentation. Madam the Vice Chairperson, you have the floor.
Honorable President, honorable members of PAP, On behalf of Chairperson of Committee on Rural Economy, Agriculture, Natural Resources and Environment, and on my own behalf, I wish to thank you for this opportunity to introduce to this August House the draft model law on food security and nutrition, the formulation of which was approved by the PAP resolution on 2nd November 2018 in Kigali, Rwanda. The proposed model law was investigated as means to advancing food security and nutrition and to create an enabling environment for the releasing of rights to educate food, which, as you know, requires multifaceted measures that could be policy, legal, institutional, and operational in nature. It is evident that FSN policies and frameworks that are encouraged in legislation are more effective in fostering sustainable involvement of FSN and the right to educate food. The formulation of model law on food security and nutrition was initiated in the context of implementation of MOU between the PAP and the FAO, which lead to signing of Technical Cooperation Program, TCP, in October 2017. The expected outcome of TCP included increasing capacity to enable a legislative environment for food security and optimal nutrition with regard. The TCP, through its activities, provided training, advocacy, and technical tools and materials to strengthen members of the PAP's position on FSN at the highest level of the political and legislative agendas. The TCP also enabled the strengthening the capacity of parliamentarians on FSN and the rights to adequate food, and the creation in May 2016 of the Pan-African Alliance for Food Security and Nutrition, PAPA-FSN, activities under the TCO also enable the formulation of a work plan in advancing parliamentary engagement on FSN in Africa and the development and implementation of communication strategy to provide greater visibility to countries which have legislative and policy measures on FSN. Honorable President, Honorable Member of PAP, it's worth recalling that the resolution on the formulation of model law on food security and nutrition underscored the importance of model law on FSN for the development and strengthening of pertinent law in African countries and mandated the Committee on Rural Economy, Agriculture, Natural Resources and Environment and the Pan-African Parliamentary Alliance in FSN to lead the formulation of a draft model on FSN in Africa and present the draft model law for consideration by the plenary of the PAP. To this end, the Committee on Agriculture benefited from the technical support of the FAO, NIBAD, the Secretariat of PAP, and other PAP committees that are members of PAPA-FSN, which enables the drafting of model law that is tabled before you. We believe that it will make a scientific and normative contribution to improve FSN in the continents and become the catalyst for the effective implementation of delivery on goals of Malabo Declaration, the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development Goals, and Aspiration of Africa Agenda 2063. It's worth highlighting that the proposed model law is informed not only internationally in place. The FAO and PAP legal team assisted the committee in conducting an assessment of existing international, regional, and national legal and policy in a statement to identify common principles, normative elements, and implementation mechanism which served as the basis for the determination of the structure and the contents of model law. About 175 pieces of legislation from close to 35 African countries were analyzed with a view to understanding the forum and substantive contents of FSN law for the continent. The study, which was conducting, explored options for a regional model law based on the typology of relevant legislation and the legal structure of African countries, which informed the normative and institutional components of model FSN legislation. Honorable President, Honorable Member of PAP, the draft model law on FSN, as you can see, includes provisions of the definition of rights and implements of individuals and groups, the duty of responsibility of states and other relevant actors at all levels, and on enabling governance and accountability mechanisms for production, distribution, and consumption of suspensions, safe and nutrition food. It also contains technical issues in the area of FSN that may be governed by 2 or more pieces of legislation. It had the necessary flexibility to be adapted to the needs and context of the different countries. In a nutshell, the draft model law on FSN is constituted of 26 articles. The issues covered may be grouped into the following thematic areas. Number 1, access to productive resources, agriculture, input and service. 2, nutrition and food safety related standards and measures. 3, regulation of food marketing and trade. 4, national food reserves and FSN information system. 5, school feeding, social protection, and other special measures. 6, institutional responsibility and coordination mechanism. 7, the right to adequate food, implementation, and accountability mechanism. And 8, implementation, interpretation, and revision of the model law. Honorable President, it's my duty to request you and the August House to take note and adopt this first draft of model law on food security and nutrition, and authorize the Committee on Agriculture to proceed with regional